Hi, this is the Mormon Mixed Faith Marriage Mastermind, where Chris Rich, Suzette Halterman, and myself, Brooke Booth, get together. We're three certified life coaches, and we specialize in helping people navigate and deal with the relationship issues that come up in an LDS mixed faith marriage. And that's what we're going to talk about on the podcast today, on this video. We're going to talk specifically about baptism. And if you don't have a child who's 8 or turning 8 or getting to be 8, that's okay. You can still listen. There's going to be a lot of things that will still apply to you, because really what we're discussing is how to make decisions when people have two different sets of values or two different sets of principles. And we're going to talk about it specifically in the context of baptism, because this one can be particularly challenging, but please know whatever we talk about here can really apply to so many different decisions and conversations that take place in a mixed faith marriage. Just a quick intro. Chris Rich is active believing. Her husband left the church 20 odd years ago. Suzette Halterman attends ish. She attends, I like to say ish, but when, maybe once or twice a month, and again, feel free to correct me if I'm saying anything wrong, and I do not attend at all. I really, really value my new Sunday morning routine of laying in bed. Really value it. But that is where we are, and that is where we are in our current lives. We're going to talk about baptism, and we're going to start. I thought it would be fun. I know we've all been baptized. I thought it would be a fun thing to start. We often start telling our own stories, but I wanted not to tell the story so much of our relationship, but the story of your own baptism. Like, what do you remember? What did you like? What didn't you like? What sticks out? If you want, you can tell a story about a baptism in your family, but I thought, let's talk about our own. Who wants to get started?
I'll say I don't remember much except for like the person who gave one of the talks made like a little wooden sheep, and I can very clearly remember the wooden sheep. Don't remember the talk. I remember that. I do very clearly remember the anxiety of feeling like I had already messed up soon after my baptism and I was already unclean. That is very clear. The actual baptism itself, besides the wooden sheep, I really don't remember anything about it.
Now I want to know what the wooden sheep, what that was, what that represented. You got to get back to me on that.
I know.
For me, I don't remember a ton about that day. I do remember it was really special and that my dad is the one that baptized me. It was on Temple Square at the Tabernacle there when they had a baptistry there. I don't even know if that's still there, but that's where I was baptized. The big thing I remember is that my older brother he's 14 years older than me, and he was there, and that just felt so special that he was there. So I knew it was like a special family event. We went to McDonald's after, and that was a really big deal. Um, and so I don't remember a ton about that actual event, but as in the years past, I've learned and I'm learning along the way. So did I have it all figured out then? Absolutely not. And I'm still learning. And now I'm very thankful. It's definitely a huge part of who I am. And for me, and I love that phrase, for me. I think that is a beautiful phrase to remember in our mixed faith relationships, that for me, I show up as my best self when I'm trying to be like Christ. So it's a big part of who I am.
And I'll share mine. I remember, like with you, Suzette, I remember almost immediately being highly concerned about maintaining my state of cleanliness, if you will, and being like, shoot, like, drat, like, lost that, and feeling a lot of anxiety and frustration around that. That's a definite, probably a primary memory. I also remember loving the outfit I wore, because I've always liked clothes. I had like a little plaid red skirt with a red sweater that I was particularly fond of. And I remember that the water was just a little brisk when we got in. Those are literally the only three things I remember, is the temperature of the water, my amazing outfit, and the anxiety, the fears. Yeah, emotions, I think, are some of the easiest things to remember, because I'm noticing all three of us remember like the emotions more than most any other detail of the day. Okay, let's talk about couples and how they struggle with making this decision for their kids. One of the things I hear pretty consistently around this decision that couples face is this issue of informed consent. Some say 8 years old isn't old enough to make this kind of decision. Others very openly celebrate that this is, their son or daughter's choosing to get baptized, and they really emphasize that. How do you do with this? How do you deal with this when you're working either with couples, Suzette, or with individual clients? How do you talk through like balancing the idea of choosing and informed consent? And a lot of it, there's like, I don't think this is any sort of secret. There's a lot of pressure, societal pressure to get baptized. And how do you balance that? How have you dealt with it in your own families? How do you deal with it with clients?
I'll just start by saying, like, my two oldest were baptized before my faith deconstruction. My youngest was baptized after my faith deconstruction, and my girl, who's number 3, she was baptized kind of right in the middle of my faith deconstruction. So how I've handled it in my own relationship has been kind of different for all of them. When I'm working with couples, really, I'm just trying to get them to talk about their different, just talk about what's important to them and try to find compromise. But the thing that I don't actually get to talk about a lot, so I was really excited that we're doing this topic, Brooke, is this informed consent piece, because I hear that all the time with couples. Like, I don't think my child's ready to make that decision because they don't really know everything. And I've been thinking a lot about that, just because, like, we're a ski family. We live like 40 minutes away from a ski resort. We ski every weekend. And at the beginning of the season, I was signing the waivers for my kids. I have to sign for all of my kids to get their season pass. That's like, they could be paralyzed and deaf and all the horrible things that can happen when they're skiing, and I'm signing it. And I'm remembering that, like, signing a waiver, it's kind of like informed consent. Like, I know the dangers and I'm okay with that. And it's up to me to decide how I'm going to handle that. And when it comes to informed consent, like, that's on the parent, I think. It's the parent that needs to be informed. Kids, of course, they're not going to understand all the ins and outs of being in religion and what it means to be in a community. And so it's really important to remember that informed consent is about the parents need to know what it means.
Oh, are we still here, Chris?
I'm here.
And I know,
Here she is. Good, because she's making such an interesting point.
sorry.
You just blipped out for a minute, but I want you to say what you were saying, Suzette, because you were talking about how the parents are the one who are making informed consent and they need to.
Yeah. And people who go through a faith deconstruction tend to delve deep and understand all of it, the history. So they're very informed. So informed consent are the parents informed and are consenting? Now, when I'm signing away my kids' lives on those waivers for skiing, I am taking the responsibility. Like, it's up to me to train them to ski. And, we teach them, like, you don't ski these runs till there's enough snow because there's these giant boulders that you can't see. And, you don't go near tree wells when there's powder, and we buy them the really good helmets, and we have walkie-talkies, and, we start them on the greens and we work up. It's not like, so the parenting is I still have to parent. I'm not giving up my right as a parent. Even though I'm informed about the dangers, like, and I think that's the piece that's missing. It's the kids don't know. And yeah, they don't really have a lot of choice. It's kind of, they're just kind of herded in that direction. Baptism is what you do. But as a parent, you're not giving up your parenting job of, I know the territory and I'm going to teach you how to best navigate it, how to be in community, how to deal with groupthink, whether it's religion or school or anywhere. Like, it's my job as a parent to guide you through this, because I know the dangers and I know the benefits and I know the pitfalls and I know where kind of the kind of iffy areas are. So that was my thought, what came to my mind.
I love that. I love the skiing analogy. That's awesome. With my kids, I had 2 that wanted to get baptized, and this was after my husband was already out of the church. So I had 2 that wanted to, and he would always say, if that's what they want to do, then I completely support their decision. And And then I had one that he didn't really want to get baptized. And we had a lot of discussions. He didn't end up getting baptized until he was 9. And he had to go through the missionary discussions to, and what was funny is this kid had been in church every single week of his life, and then he still had to have the discussions. And it was tricky because looking back at it now, and I'm kind of embarrassed about this, but it was, I would say, this is your choice. This is totally your choice. And I think you should do this, and God thinks you should do that. And so I know, like in my situation, yes, it was his choice, and I'm using air quotes on that, but he definitely knew what I wanted him to do. And so, and I think that can be, tricky. Um, and now my kids are, they've grown up, and all 3 of them have decided that's not, they have now made another choice that religion isn't their thing. So I think it's important. Also, every kid is so different that I think we all know our children, and some kids really, they truly do want to get baptized and they're excited about that. Is that for social reasons? It could be. Is it because they love Jesus? It definitely could be. Every child is so different. And so I think it's important to, to recognize that, and to, your child, and to have them, to have the discussions about it, and to ask them where they're at too, with this idea that Suzette was, we're still the parents, and we're still going to be there to guide them and help them navigate what's going on.
I want to come at it a little bit of a different way. Is when I look at like informed consent versus, this is a really important decision. There's a clash of values. That's how I see it. Like 2 principled people with values that they're living by, with principles they want to adhere to, trying to make a decision where their values are in opposition often. Like that's a lot of times what's happening when you have this sort of informed consent conversation. And I think this can prove really challenging, because my training was certainly, when you have a principled decision, you push through. Like you put your head down and you stick with that regardless of what people around you are saying or doing. And it's a little bit like, to my legal, we call it scorch earth. Like when you're just like scorch the earth. But that was very much how I would have approached this. Because I'm like, I know I'm right here. Like, I know that the principles and values I have are right. So when I think about it, this is something I've seen with clients that I've worked with, is sometimes we do take the scorched earth approach. And I'm not saying that that's always wrong. Like, if that's your principles and that's your value and that's how you want to deal with it, please do that. But I think this is oftentimes one of the first times in a marriage where maybe you have 2 opposing principles at play, and a decision needs to be made. And it can be a real skill set deficit trying to make a decision where you've never had to grapple with that before, where you've never had to come to a decision when you have opposing principles or opposing values. And so sometimes we just default to the scorched earth approach without thinking about that carefully and really looking at the situation and wondering if that's how we want to approach it. And so I only present here not with any grand solutions or ideas, but I say, if you have 2 people who are highly principled wanting to make this decision and they have opposite approaches, how do you want to make that decision? How do you want to make a decision when you both have different values and different principles, trying to come together and come to some sort of consensus here? And I would just say sometimes we default to the scorched earth approach when we don't pause and really think about how we want to approach that. Let's move to the next one. So let's talk about just the parent who's had the faith transition for a minute. And then the next we'll talk about the parent who is still like active believing. I talked to a lot of my clients about alternative ways of dealing with this, reframing this, but sometimes I'll say, like, let's focus on the kid, and the culture is the culture, and like to get some acceptance and reframing around that. a lot of people I know who are post-Mormon really struggle with the idea of supporting the organization of the church that has caused them shame or hurt or trauma. And they don't want to then just perpetuate that with their children and just like kick the cycle again to the next generation. And so they really struggle with how to deal with this. So much pressure from family or community or their spouse or even their child, that's so much. And yet they still feel very like they're doing a disservice to their child by engaging in this. And it can be really, really challenging. Any ideas on this? Any thoughts or comments on how to deal with this just from the transitioning spouse's point of view?
Yeah, I'll just say that I think this happens so often that we project our own experience and our own trauma onto our kid. Like, because I might feel like I was harmed by the church, or I have some kind of lifelong complications from being raised in the church, that will happen to my kid if they're baptized. And I'm going to go back to my skiing example. A lot of us were like thrown on a black diamond, double black diamond, without anyone like who really knew how to ski, helping us navigate like religion, right? And we ended up with kind of injuries that are lifelong complications. Like, that's how a lot of people who've gone through deconstruction feel. Like, I was harmed by that process in a lot of different ways. Now, but that was my experience, that maybe the people raising me didn't really understand like what the harm that a patriarchal system can do to a girl's psyche. Maybe they didn't understand how purity culture can really impact women's sexuality long term. They didn't understand that, but I do. And so it is a different experience. Like, if my kids get baptized and are navigating church, their experience is not going to be my experience, because it's like, now I'm teaching my kids to ski and how to do it. And hey, there's other routes. You don't actually have to go this route. And oh, you're done skiing? Let's go have hot chocolate, right? And you don't even have to like skiing. We didn't have people telling us, you can leave the church whenever you want if you don't like it, right? You don't have to stay a member. You'll still be loved and welcomed in our family, whether you attend church or not. Like, that's what our kids can have. And that was different than what we didn't have. And so I think it's important to not project our experience onto our kids, and just remember, like, this is a whole different ballgame, because they have a parent who has deconstructed, and they have a parent who values the religion, and we can have both. And our kids' experience in the church, in whatever form they choose it or not choose it, is going to be completely different. So we don't need to like pull our kids away from that risk. Like, no, you can't learn to ski because I had a horrible skiing experience, right? It's like, no, like, I'm going to teach you how to do this in a much better way than I had. So that's my thoughts.
I love that. Those are great. That's a great way to look at it. So from an active believing member point of view, I think it's really important to remember that when someone's making a choice or a decision, what we do isn't random. There's a reason why that person believes the way they do. And, to kind of look in, where is this coming from? And I love asking the question, like, instead of like, what is wrong with you? What is your problem? Why are you believing this way? Which sometimes we jump into as a believing member, to try to understand what happened to your person. What happened? Why is it that they are struggling? What happened to them to cause them to have these feelings? And I think looking at our nervous systems is very, very important, and understanding, Suzette, like you were saying, did they fall down a rocky area? What were the things that were hard for them, and why was there trauma? Were there things that they learned, or things that seemed dangerous, to really try to understand where they're coming from? And I think recognizing why this doesn't feel safe for them. And I know that can be very hard to do, because we think, no, my way is the right way, but just really trying to understand, why was this such a hard thing, and what are they trying to protect my child from? And just, having those conversations. And with that, I think these are conversations where we can really, ask questions and listen to understand our other person's point of view instead of trying to convince them that our way is the right way. Help me to understand why this is so hard for you. What were the experiences that that were so rocky and hard? And I think that can be actually a beautiful opportunity to connect and try to, try to understand it from their point of view. And I think the big thing with all this is, as parents, we both love our children. We have different perspectives and different backgrounds. And I think when we can try to understand, like, what are they trying to protect my child from? And on that flip side, what am I wanting for my child? And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But I think, this can be an opportunity to really understand, help me understand what was so hard for you. And I think it's a great opportunity to learn from each other.
I want to reflect what Suzette said too, because that's something I do with clients a lot, is I'll just point out, like, your children are having a fundamentally different experience than you had. Like, just by virtue of the fact that, one parent has had a faith transition, I think that's helpful just to remember. But I like to sometimes give them like some practical things too, is I like to think like, hey, this is a rite of passage, right? This is a cultural rite of passage. It's like a ritual acknowledging that they've turned 8, that they're smarter now or something like that. And it can be helpful for some clients. And again, this is not for all, but it can be helpful for some people to look at it from like an anthropological lens and sort of put on their Margaret Mead hat and pretend to be like somebody looking at a culture instead of somebody swept away by a culture, and just sort of step back and just look and be like, okay, this is why my family is doing this, and this is why this is happening, and this is why this is happening. It's all because of this like cultural like rite of passage. And it can be helpful to put some distance there so that it doesn't become such a personal thing for you. So, and then that can help in the decision-making process, or especially if you decide to go through with it, that can be very helpful. I also want to suggest that choosing not to baptize your child is also fine. It's totally fine. It's a totally legitimate choice. I think that there's value in having more 8-year-olds opt out so that they can feel like it's a legitimate choice, so that other parents can feel like it's a legitimate choice, so that there can be more adaptability and flexibility there, and not so much pressure put on children and families and parents, especially in this really like challenging time. Those are my comments on that. Let's talk a little bit more about this, though. Let's talk about it now from the other point of view, is to the believing spouse. It can be so challenging when this is a belief you hold and you hold dear, and it's a sacred belief, and it's something that is tied to not just membership in the church, but to things like the gift of the Holy Ghost, things like receiving further saving ordinances down the line. Like, this is challenging. How to work through that, having these beliefs, that seeing this baptism is crucial to salvation, how to deal with that when your spouse doesn't see it that way. Thoughts on that one?
Why don't you go, Chris? My internet. Why don't you go first, Chris? My internet's being really weird right now. I'm trying to fix it.
Well, I think part of it, so this is a hard spot to be in, and to validate your feelings and to normalize that this is something that a lot of active believing members, this can be really hard, and give yourself permission to feel all those feelings that, whatever is coming up for you. I think it's also important to recognize what does baptism mean to you? What are the like fundamental things? And I was thinking about this. So for me, what I make it mean is your child's learning to make a commitment, and they are, they're like, that we hear the phrase that they're on the covenant path. This is a big thing, that you want your child on that path. And then along the way, they're making covenants they're learning to mourn with those that mourn, and to comfort those that stand in need of comfort. And so just those inherent parts of baptism, that as a parent, that's like, yes, this is what I want for my child. And then all the things with the gift of the Holy Ghost, like, wanting your child to have that comfort and that guidance and that warning system. And so understanding like what are those, for me, those were the big things that were important, and understanding that what it meant to me, and then recognizing that my husband had a very different view of that. And not that so often we want to get them on our page, and that might not, a lot of times that is not it's just recognizing, for me, this is what I believe, and recognizing that they have a different belief. But going back to that idea of, we both just want what is best for our kids. And that was my idea of what was best for our children. And he had a different idea. So I think that is one of the big things, as, remembering that we are on the same team, that we're both doing the same thing. It just looks very, very different.
And from a couple's perspective, I wanted to talk about the relationship principle of who does it matter more to. This is a really important principle, because give and take is a really important part of relationships. There has to be give and take. And when do you give? Well, when it matters more to someone else than it does to you. So like if the believing spouse really feels like this is necessary for their salvation, and like so much hinges on this, and like for me, I don't really believe in an afterlife. So I'm like, I don't like baptized or not. I don't know. I don't think that it really matters for the next life. So it matters more to my husband than it does to me, because he does believe in an afterlife, right? It matters more to him. So that's another way you can kind of know, where do I give? Where can I take? Like if you don't care as much about the implications of baptism, then give on that and be like, okay, yeah, if it's important to you, that's fine. I can go along with that. There's other things that are more important to me, like trek is way more important to me than baptism. Like, over my dead body, will my children go to trek and learn a completely inaccurate history of the church? Like, I feel strongly about that, but baptism, I'm like, whatever. So, give and take depending on what's important to a person. And that's an important relationship principle. When it's equally important to both people, that's when you have to really work on some compromise and middle ground, and like, what are our shared values? Where can we kind of find something that's workable for both of us?
And that's what I want to pick up, is when it is a shared, like equally valued. That's when sometimes we fall into that scorched earth tactic that I mentioned earlier, and where we push through. And then I want to just point out that a lot of times when we're doing that, we're not actually engaging in partnership. Like, we're forgetting the principle of partnership when we do that. And like, that might be something just to be aware of. Like, do you value partnership more than this? Like, there's another value equation for an individual to go through. If this is a value to do this, is this also a value, and which one do you prioritize, and then make the decision accordingly. There's not a right or wrong, but it's each individual to really decide, and then decide how they want to manage that. Okay, let's talk about the next one, and that's extended family or ward family. Sometimes couples aren't really struggling with themselves. Sometimes the struggle is, how do we appease mom or dad or sisters or brother or sister so-and-so or bishop or primary president? Like, how do we manage everybody else? I like to think of this as a personal decision, but on a very public stage. Like, people know if you didn't get baptized or not. Like, I'll phrase this as our youngest. He's not baptized. He's 10 now. And he's not baptized. And this was one of the things I was most concerned about, are like, what are people going to think? Like, what are they going to say about us? Like, what's the conversation that's going to be had in meetings, or in, in presidency meetings or PEC meetings about us? So what are thoughts on this? I'm just going to go off camera to go help my puppy dog for a minute.
I think it's important to understand what your why is, what you've decided, you and your partner, the decision that you've made. Why are we doing this? And then when people are asking about it, family members or ward members, when you know your why, then it helps you to stick to that. And, when other people start asking questions, I also think it's important to have boundaries, and to let people know that this is, if you've got people asking about it, to let them know, this is a decision that we're making as a family. If this changes, we'll let you know when, and to, we'll let you know but for now, this is where we're at. And sometimes, to have conversations with the primary presidency and just let them know, we don't know what we don't have a decision. If you do have a decision, let them know. If you don't, let it, to articulate that so they can give you some space.
And I love that. Boundaries are so important. How you are raising your family is nobody else's business, and kindly letting them know that, right? This is how we're going to do it. There you go. But I'll just say, for when my two youngest were baptized, we didn't involve the ward at all. The first was because it was during COVID. So it was just immediate family. And, we don't live close to extended family. One set of grandparents did come, and then we just had a bishopric member, but we didn't have the primary president, nobody. And we liked that so much that we did it again when my youngest was baptized, even though it wasn't COVID. We just said, hey, this is private, and we want it to be private. And that's what my child wanted. We gave him the option. Do you want to have it kind of be like a big party and everybody comes? Do you want it to just be family? And my kid was like, I don't want everybody watching me. So it was just like siblings. It was just siblings, a set of grandparents, and no ward members. So that's an option. If you do choose to go with the baptism, like, you don't have to include everybody. It can be a private family affair. And not even the primary president came for ours. We just said we want it to just be about family, and it's just going to be a family event. And so we're not inviting anyone. And I didn't really care if people were offended by that, because again, it's my family, it's our choice, it's how we choose to do things. So that's just one way you can do it. If kind of the outside pressures, and that helped me, because then I didn't have to worry about, like, are we doing talks the traditional way? Because we did it very non-traditionally. We didn't do any of the talks. Like, we sat in a circle and we talked just about like qualities of Jesus, and we made it about like, this is about being like Jesus. There was no talk of being clean, any of that. So you can do it your own way. That can be part of your compromise if you choose to go along with it. And as Brooke said, it's perfectly valid not to have your kid baptized. But if you do, you can make it your own. You don't have to include the ward. You don't have to do it the traditional way. You can do it any number of ways. And because you do still have parental control. Always remember that. I'm not sacrificing my parental control just because I'm allowing my child to get baptized.
For me, it's really helpful to just keep in mind like what I have control over and what I don't have control over. I don't have control over my in-laws wanting me to pick a date, or the primary president bringing it up in primary every week and hyping up the kids. I don't have control over what the bishop's talking about and doing. I don't have control over those things. Instead, focusing on what I do have control over. I don't have control over them and what they're doing, but I can manage myself. I can manage my own emotions. I can manage my own messaging to my family. Like, trying to manage other people just doesn't work. It just creates more stress and anxiety all the way around. Instead, it's more gentle to learn to manage like my own emotions, my own, how I want to be showing up, the best course forward I want to take, and let other people do that for themselves. Like, this is very much in line with the boundaries. This is very much in aligned with like, you raise your family the way like that works for you and your spouse, and letting other people be who they are, think what they think, say what they say, and just letting that be them and not something you need to control. And that's easier said than done, but it's always well worth trying for. Okay, I want to talk about the parent-child relationship, because this could be another aspect too. Like, whether you're believing or have had the transition, like, how do you deal with the child wanting to be baptized? How do you deal with the child not wanting to be baptized? How do you talk to your kid about their baptism? How do you talk to them, if you're the believer or the non-believer? Like, how does this work? Because there's often series of conversations that need to take place if they're getting baptized, if they're not getting baptized. Parents want to share different points of view and different information, different, preparations. It's great, can look very differently from different spouses. how about having the conversation with the child? There's some ideas around there, navigating that relationship.
I think one of the most helpful phrases is, I believe this, Dad believes this, and not making it right or wrong. It's just like, this is what I believe. This is what Dad believes. And we both love you so much. And whatever you decide, we're going to love you and we support you. Um, and I think that can be, because then we still get to be our unique selves and share what we believe. And once again, we're on the same team that we both want what is best for our child. So I think just articulating that. And did I do a great job of that in the beginning? No, I didn't. It's a lot easier 10 years later to look back and say that.
I think a lot of times we try to connect to our children kind of out of our own anxiety and fear. Like, I got to talk to them about baptism, and I got to counter all the things they're learning, and I got to and it's very anxious instead of like just connecting with our children about what matters to them. Like, hey, what do you want to do after, the or like, you don't even have to connect with them over the baptism. Like, if it's important to one parent to do the teaching, great, if they want to. And if it's not important to you, then connect with your child around other things, right? You don't have to connect with them around the baptism. You don't have to talk about Great to Be Eight. You don't have to do the preparation. You can connect to them about whatever your kid is interested in. So I think it can just be, because we can get anxious because of our own trauma, we can get so anxious about the implications of baptism, and we got to counter, and we got to like prepare our kids so that, so they don't experience religious trauma. But just like let that anxiety go and just connect with your kid around what matters to them. Like, just build your parent relationship, is what I think.
This is one of my favorite things to do with my clients, is talk to them like this. Like, how do you want to spend this day? Like, what message do you want to be imparting? And a lot of times that message is something like, I want to celebrate this kid. I want to celebrate who they are. I want to celebrate that they're alive. I want to celebrate that they're in this family. I want to celebrate all of that. And that comes very easily and naturally. And then it's fueled with love. It's fueled with excitement instead of that anxiety, instead of that stress. And that, when I see a parent switch into that mode, when they're not worried about like the indoctrination or the messaging, and they're just like, oh, this is a time where we celebrate this kid, and that's where my focus is going to be. A lot of times that the day goes really well, because they're just like, and so all of their messaging, all of their conversation is like, I'm celebrating you because you're wonderful. And it's not because you're a member of the church. I'm celebrating you because you. And again, other parents may say the other things, great. Like, that's how they're choosing to build that relationship with their kid. Perfect. Sometimes it can be helpful though to just hear some optional ways of talking to your kid around baptism, because we weren't modeled that or demonstrated that. So we only know sort of the Great to Be Eight model. But I just want to suggest that you can just focus on, you want to celebrate this child because they're worthy of celebrating, because you're grateful that they're in your family, because you're grateful that they're your kid, because you're excited that they're 8 and that they're growing up and learning and dynamic and developing skills and talents and things. I think that can be really fun for a parent to approach 8 that way, as a celebration of the child's life and accomplishments and potential, and have that be the focus. And I've seen so many clients who can just ride that wave and really enjoy an 8, the baptism, if you will.
And that just reminds me of the very beginning when you pointed out that we remembered our emotional experience around our baptism. Well, kids pick up on our anxiety. If they pick up on that this baptism is a division between mom and dad, and I am displeasing one of them, and mom or dad are super anxious about this, like, they pick up on that. Kids are so aware. So yeah, just like trying to do what you got to do to get rid of all that anxiety and get that confidence back in yourself. Like, no matter what, baptized, no baptized, like, we're fine. I'm fine. I'm still going to parent my child and connect with them and celebrate them.
What about you, Chris? Any last comments before we wrap up? Any words of wisdom?
Yeah, I think it's so easy to see this in a very black and white way. Either they get baptized or they don't get baptized. And I think it's important to recognize there are other So you could get baptized when you're 8. You could get baptized when you are, my husband's grandma got baptized in her late 80s. So there's a huge spectrum of when it can happen. There's people that don't, there's people that do. So I think it is important to recognize that there are other ways of looking at it and exploring those with your spouse to see, what can that look like to help your brain see that there's other options. I think that can be helpful.
Yeah, and I'll offer, so our oldest 2 were baptized before my faith transition, my middle one during my faith transition, and I mentioned our youngest, he's not baptized at all. He's fine. He goes to church every Sunday. He loves singing time. He loves all of that. But it was his choice. I'm realizing like it was a joint conversation where we talked about it because I'm with Suzette on this, and I don't really think kids really like have full power of choice at that point. So, but it was an open conversation, and it was something that like his father and I agreed on. And he has not, like, I'm just offering this as just like a personal anecdote, but he has not suffered because of that, whether socially or spiritually, he has not suffered. And he loves church, and he also loves like many, many other things. Like it's not his only identity either. And I just offer that because sometimes we're just so scared to even consider these alternative options. Because they're unknown, because we're not familiar, because there's not a lot of examples, because there's not a lot of precedence around that. And that's what I would love to see. I would love to see more options available for different individuals and different families so that it can be less stressful and more comfortable to really explore other options without having to do like hours of coaching and hours of therapy to forge a new path. So that's my encouragement here is I love what Chris says is like, find what works for you. It might be the traditional baptism. It might not be. It might be this really like niche family baptism that Suzette did. I love that. It might be waiting 10 years. It might be never getting baptized. Like these are all really viable options. And as 2 parents, you get to decide what's best for you and your family.
I love that. And I just want to add, like, who says that baptism has to look a certain way? Like that we have to have the Holy Ghost talk and the baptism talk and the musical numbers. Like part of compromise is creativity. So, yeah, it's like there's not just the get baptized, don't get baptized. There's a million areas in between of how can we do this ritual, this rite of passage. I mean, you could make it look any way you want. Yeah, people might push back on it because it's just the cultural norm. But I agree with you, Brooke. The more that we kind of break the cultural norms, the more we can expand as communities, right? That there's more than one ways to do things that are all fine and good and hopeful.
All right, that's what we got for you this month. We will meet again next month with more discussions for you around mixed faith marriages. Take care.